From EU leaders to Theresa May. After a victory for the UK Prime Minister in Parliament last night, British MPs voted in favour of changing her Brexit deal and sending her back to Brussels to renegotiate the Northern Irish backstop. But EU leaders have other ideas, saying that they won't renegotiate the withdrawal agreement. Let's take a look.
The only point I want to make is to confirm that the EU institutions remain united. And we stand by the agreement we have negotiated with the UK, never against the UK. Thank you very much.
Wij zullen nooit de interne markt kapot maken. Die is veel te belangrijk voor onze bedrijven, voor onze economie. En we zullen ook nooit onze Ierse vrienden loslaten.
There's not one vote in a positive proposal. And they have still not talked to the parties. All the time, in Germany and all other countries, the opposition and the government will talk to each other. They do not do that. They should make up and come up with their proposals and make up their mind for a constructive solution. And not come with the same questions the fifth time back.
All right, with me in the studio to discuss Europe's reactions is Swedish MEP Anna Maria Corazza Bilot from the European People's Party. We have a British MEP and leader of UKIP, Gerard Batten, and we also have our political editor back on the couch with us, Darren McCaffrety. All right, let's talk about this, Anna Maria, because you said you were talking to Michel Barnier earlier in the show, and no means no. It's clear what they're saying. No means no. So the EU is not going to budge at all on this?
Well, let me say that the British people are our friends, our partners. They are not our enemies. We want to do everything that is possible in a constructive and positive way to find the best arrangement to avoid a no deal 29th of March. We have been negotiating very united, cool, calm and collected for a year and a half an agreement. The backstop was an idea that came from London to ensure that since Great Britain doesn't want to stay in the internal market, doesn't want to stay in the custom union, we of course have to follow the treaties because Europe is based on the rule of law, therefore preserve the four freedoms and the custom union's integrity, which means not having a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. There is not much more to do than this agreement. It's the best possible agreement in the circumstances.
I mean, we saw Elmar Brok there saying also that Theresa May is going to be coming back here with basically the same thing. Gerard, nothing has changed, and they're expecting a different reaction from the EU.
Well,
what
exactly.
is that?
Well, I mean, the problem here, you have to understand, is that although the British people voted to leave the European Union, we have a Parliament and a political class and a Prime Minister that doesn't want to leave. If you were going to leave the European Union, you would not have gone through the process that they've gone through for the last 2.5 years, which has basically been an elaborate charade to end up where we are now. Yeah. If you want to leave the European Union, you don't ask the European Union how you can do it, because you're not going to get a constructive answer. Why would you? Because they don't want us to leave. If the British government really wanted to leave, they would have repealed the 1972 European Communities Act as a first step immediately after the referendum. They would have then said to the European Union, don't panic, because all EU law remains in place, but we are now going to start an amending and repealing that law in a spirit of friendship and cooperation, but in accordance with our priorities and our timescales. That's the only way Britain will ever leave the European Union. What you've got now is a situation where I was surprised yesterday, actually, that Parliament voted against this delay, because that's really what they want to do, is to delay and impede the whole process. But now they've said, OK, we're not going to ask for an extension to Article 50, but we're sending Mrs May back to see the Commission, who've already said that they are not going to renegotiate.
Right. It's interesting that all the negotiators from the British government, one after the other, were Brexiters. They were all from, they were all from your family. They were all, I mean,
the two Brexit ministers have resigned.
An elected politician from the oldest democracy in the world, that less than 2 months from Brexit, with people that are, buying medicines, fresh food. Great Britain has become the biggest purchaser of refrigerators in the world.
Yeah.
It's still using this campaign, destructive rhetoric with the blame game. I think it's enough. It's time for responsibility. It's time to come out with a plan. That to say that there is nothing to negotiate, no dialogue, I mean, it's just not understanding.
Okay.
I think what
Europe and Great Britain, it's just, you are not really representing the people of Great Britain. They deserve better. They deserve better.
Yeah, but there were 16 million people who voted to remain. And that's the problem here. The fundamentals of that have not changed. Britain remains and has been for the last 2.5 years, a deeply divided country on whether to remain or stay. And even with the referendum result, clearly the country is divided on how it should leave, on what terms, and what its future relationship with Europe should be. That is why, despite the negotiations here, both the Conservative Party and Parliament and the British public have been essentially debating with themselves on what that future trade relationship and what the exit from the European Union should look like. So it is maybe not a surprise that in a democracy where opinions are so divided, that we are where we are today.
And what I wanted to say was that when we saw the decision from the MPs' vote last night, it took about 6 minutes, I think, if I'm not wrong, for the EU to react and say, actually, no. Do you see any cracks?
They had already written the press release before the vote had happened. And the question is, why should the EU say yes now? I mean, ultimately, Theresa May is coming back with the same questions that they could not answer during an 18-month negotiating process.
I'll tell you.
And so they will sit on their hands and
I just want to bring something up, because Anna Maria brought something up, an idea earlier. You said that actually the EU doesn't want to renegotiate because you don't want a crash out. You don't want a no deal. You want a deal through. But actually, we did start hearing from different voices where a no deal is slowly becoming a possibility. That's an interesting thing. It used to be unpalatable. Even just a few days ago, it was unpalatable. But let's listen to what Philippe Lambert, he's from the Greens here at the MEP, what he had to say about the idea of a crash out.
Well, I think there's an underestimation in the United Kingdom, and certainly with the hard Brexiteers on both sides of the aisle, by the way, that the cost of hurting the single market is judged on this side of the channel as much bigger than the cost of no-deal Brexit. So yes, a no-deal Brexit will be damaging, not just to the UK, massively so, but also to the European Union. But accepting to open a gigantic backdoor into the single market would be even more damaging. And so the calculus is quite obvious. If we have to choose, we will choose the lesser of two evils, and that is a no-deal Brexit. Lesser
of two evils. I mean, that's interesting that this used to be an idea that people were allergic to on this side of the channel. Now, Manfred Weber, the leader of the European People's Party group, this is the largest bloc here at the European Parliament. He was also speaking about this today. Let's hear what he had to say about a no deal.
Tell me, we have an agreement among 28 governments. The British government signed it, and now one parliament refused it. So for me, it's totally clear that the ball is in the field of the body who was refusing the treaty. Again, 28 countries, 28 governments, 3 institutions on European level agree on a common understanding, and only one is refusing. That's why the British friends must give us clarity. Only to say we want to have new negotiations without telling us about the purpose of such a negotiation brings us to nowhere.
Okay, if the choice were to crash out or to remove the backstop or negotiate the Irish backstop, which would it be for the EU? It seems now the idea is better to have a no deal. What do you think?
Well, this is not the choices. I mean, the no deal, I think, would be the worst for everyone. But what we are saying, we want to respect the people of Great Britain decision, come with an alternative, tell us what you want, but not wishful thinking. Give us a plan. The ball is in London.
Well, I mean,
give us a plan for a negotiated solution.
They are clear. The British Parliament has said.
They said just an alternative arrangement. They didn't say what it is. And, we have less than 2 months.
Well,
Gerard,
they didn't say what it is.
Jump in, Gerard.
I probably must be about the only British politician that's actually got a plan. And I've been talking about it for the last few years before we even had the referendum. All of this has been this whole thing has been conducted on completely false premise. This idea of crashing out and jumping off a cliff and leaving without a plan. These are all words that are designed to influence how people think. It's nothing like that at all. We are a member of this thing on the basis of treaties. Treaties have no force in law. Britain can pull out, I think something like 52 treaties have been resiled from since 1988 in Britain. It is a treaty. All we have to do is say that we're leaving, explain to the EU how we're going to do it, and we could have, for example, immediately after the referendum, have offered you continued tariff-free trade or WTO terms and said,
do you believe in international law?
This is completely
it's not international law.
This
you don't understand. A treaty is not law. A treaty is
a voluntary agreement.
Exactly. It is a voluntary agreement between governments. And in our case, the monarch is the head of the constitution. It is agreement between the crown and other governments. And a treaty can be withdrawn withdrawn from at any point under our law. Because
In
the
an
only
orderly
thing,
way
the
based on the
only
Lisbon
thing-
Treaty,
The only thing that
which
makes it
binds
legal
us.
in the UK is the 1972 European Communities Act. Once that's repealed, none of it has any force, except those bits we've allowed into law over the years, which is now many thousands, and we will have to dismantle that going forward over time.
And then you think that Europe's going to be terribly trustworthy when it comes to a future trade relationship? Because I assume you would still want to trade with the European Union,
Well,
wouldn't you?
trade goes on between countries, peoples and companies. It doesn't go on between governments. And Britain's been a world trading...
governments don't facilitate trade.
Governments,
I'm sorry,
and quite
I
often
think
they
that,
impede it as well.
You know, the people
But
of
what
Great Britain, the ones
what
that are going to suffer
when we
more
leave the
about
European
a no deal if it happens.
the European Union sells Britain far more than we sell them. The bulk of our profitable trade is with the rest of the world. We want to continue trading with you.
What do you do with the Good Friday
Why does the British
agreement?
why does the British government then continually insist, and the Treasury saying that, and cabinet ministers, Brexiteer cabinet ministers, say that what the country does not need is no deal?
Because, I'll tell you the short answer, because most of them are Remainers.
Very quick answer, because we have to move on, because we have to move on.
Quickly,
Okay,
we've had two Brexit negotiators, David Davis and Dominic Raab, who've had to resign from their positions because they know the government and Mrs May and the civil service are not sincere about leaving.
Because they were not able to produce anything.
Because the government
You know,
isn't
the
sincere
issue
about
for
leaving.
Europe with the Good
Hold on.
Friday agreement
I'll give you
cannot
last
be
word for this.
overlooked.
Another irrelevancy.
All right. Let's leave that for now, because we have a lot more. I mean, a lot of elements in Brexit that really is coming to the picture. A lot of questions being raised, and we've been seeing from European reaction. It has been mixed and it has been swift, and in some cases, it has been dramatic. Let's take a look at this. Theresa May departing Parliament last night after a win in the Commons chamber. But despite the triumphant coverage in some of today's papers, the British PM faces an uphill battle, and few are convinced she'll succeed. The investment giant Goldman Sachs today increased the probability of a no-deal Brexit from 10% to 15%. Also panicking? The Dutch. The Hague has passed a bill granting Prime Minister Mark Rutte's government emergency powers to deal with the fallout from a no-deal Brexit. It gives lawmakers the power to amend laws without the pre-approval of Parliament for a period of 6 months. And even if Brussels does reopen withdrawal negotiations, don't expect that to be easy. Manfred Weber, an ally of Angela Merkel and candidate for Commission President, today warning that Gibraltar, the divorce bill, and citizens' rights will all be back on the negotiating table. With 58 days until Brexit, could we all be heading back to square one? All right, I'd like to focus on the Dutch and the emergency powers there. Anna Maria, do you think that that is a legitimate reaction or a little bit of an overreaction getting those emergency powers for no deal?
We also have emergency contingency plans here in the European Union, because that's going to affect millions of people.
Sure, but granting the government emergency powers, which means you don't need the Parliament's approval for passing new measures, is that a reaction that's equal to the
there
problem
have
of no
to
deal?
be measures that will be taken, you know, from one day to the other. European citizens will become migrants in Britain, and British people are going to become migrants in another member state. What happened with their rights from one day to the other? What do you do with the trucks, you know, in Calais and in Dover overall with medicines blocks and food blocks? I mean, the air traffic. I mean, these people don't realize what the European Union is. They have no idea. And I think the people, I mean, I miss this about the people, the citizens. What's going to happen with people that study, that have a company, that, you know, they're entitled to the social security?
The Commission did pass some no-deal contingency
You
plans.
don't care about the people. You just don't care about the people. It's amazing.
You've not raised
a last response.
People, citizens from your country, you know, that don't know what's going to happen in less than 2 months.
We have already offered a reciprocal deal between European citizens living in the UK citizens living on the continent. And you get the much better end of the deal, because your citizens that come can use our health services, our education services. Let me finish my point.
Exit agreement, not
use
future
our
relations.
services.
British people in Spain don't use the Spanish healthcare system.
Spain doesn't have a health service in the same way that Britain does. You have to pay. And in Eastern Europe, they have no benefits, they have no public housing, they have no health service. So we do not get the same benefits as people get in our country.
You talk
Okay,
like we
clearly
were
we
not
can't
bound by
agree.
the rule of law, but we were in a jungle.
right,
Great
madam, you're
Britain, the
talking
oldest
rubbish. You don't
So
democracy.
even
this sums up what happens in Brexit, actually.
And you deny logic, madam.
We'll have-
the rule of law.
We will have to leave it at that. A lot more Brexit talk coming up your way.